This is Kathy from Gadget Stop 321, and in today's video I'm going to be taking a look at KWZ Standard Grapefruit. I'm going to be testing it in a variety of pins and nib sizes ranging from a Pilot Extra Fine to a 1.5 stub nib. And today I'm featuring two pins that I don't normally use in these writing samples. I've got my Sailor Pro Color 500 with a fine steel nib. And this is my favorite pen to use this ink in. In fact, before I started doing these writing samples, it's the only pen I had used Standard Grapefruit in. And I'm also going to be featuring my Lamy CP1. And today I've got the medium nib on it, medium stainless steel. I don't use this nib a lot. I was just curious what this ink would look like in a wider nib than I usually use. Okay, I'm going to start with the extra fine. Let me zoom in a bit. Well, there we go. Make sure I'm in focus. This is a Pilot 78G with the extra fine nib. I pretty much just use this for writing samples. I don't use this for any everyday writing because it's so fine. Sometimes this extra fine nib can be scratchy, even on this smooth Tomoe River paper, but it's not scratchy. It's pretty pleasant, especially for an extra fine nib. I wouldn't call it smooth, but it's not scratchy. All right. Next, I've got my Sailor Pro Color 500 with a fine nib. This is just very pleasant. Pretty wet. I just really enjoy that. All right. Next is the Lamy CP1 with the medium nib. All right, that looks pretty good, very pleasant. A little bit more broad than I typically like to use. My favorite nib sizes are the fine and medium Japanese nibs. But that was pleasant. I don't use that nib a lot. Next, I've got my Pilot Pereira that has the cursive medium, or sometimes it's called a 1.0 stub nib. Now, since this Pereira is a little bit drier of a writer than these previous pens, see how much drier that is. This is coming across much more orange than the previous writing samples. These first three look like a orangish red or a reddish orange, one of those. But this is looking pretty much like a orange compared to those first three. All right, next I've got my Nemesign Singularity with the 0.6 stub nib. Now, I don't know if you could hear that on the paper. This nib, I could hear it. It sounded like a pencil writing. I could feel the feedback, but it was still very smooth. I couldn't, feel the nib catching on the paper in any way. It was very pleasant, but I could hear it, unlike the previous nibs. All right, and finally, I've got my Jinhao X750 with a 1.5 stub nib. Well, there was a hard start. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. That kind of surprises me. All right, I'm going to let this dry a little bit and we'll come back to it. I want to take a look at some writing samples on other types of paper. My little ARC notebook from Staples. This ink just performed so well. Look, in the extra fine, there was some decent wetness. All of these you can see on the little ink smears. So they just felt good on the paper. No scratchiness with any of these. I put a little heart beside my Sailor Pro Color 500. It's my favorite pen to use with this ink, but they were all very pleasant. And I noticed with the Nemesign, none of the others, but on the Nemesign, I could hear that it sounded like I was writing with a pencil, but there was feedback, but it was pleasant, no scratchiness. One thing to note, a lot of times on this ARC notebook paper, you'll get not sharp edges on the 1.5 stub. There'll be just little bits of feathering. You can see the ink spreading a little bit, or it will be spindly in some places. Very sharp edges. It just performs beautifully on this paper. And I thought, with it being so sharp on here, I thought, oh, on the copy paper, I bet I'm not going to see any feathering. Nothing even tried to bleed through. You can see a little bit of show through there, but no spots of anything even trying to bleed through. And it just felt good, the ink coming out of the pen on this ARC notebook paper, which is kind of unusual. A lot of times this ARC notebook paper, it feels like you're writing with a magic marker. The ink wants to spread a little bit. So I thought that was interesting. On the Rhodia paper, I had a hard start with my Lamy here. So I'm not, let's see. Yeah. That was kind of unusual. The Pilot Prera was very smooth. And the 1.5 stub, I'm seeing just a hint of sheen, and that's just me looking for it. I don't think if you use this it would jump out at you. So when I got to the 20-pound copy paper, I was kind of surprised. I had another hard start with the Nemesign, but instead of just leaving it blank, I instinctively went back and rewrote there on the end. So another hard start on the Pilot Prera. It wasn't scratchy, but the ink felt kind of dry coming out of the pen. It felt pretty smooth on the 78G. My Pro Color, though, the ink felt like it wanted to spread. It felt like I was writing with a magic marker. And on the stub nib, the edges aren't super crisp. Again, it felt like I was writing with a magic marker. As far as bleed through goes, almost everything bled through. The only thing that didn't bleed through, even the extra fine had a few dots of bleed through. The only one that didn't bleed through was the Prera with the cursive medium. The stub nib bled through a lot. So I was kind of surprised that it bled through that much, considering how it performed on the ARC notebook. I'm really impressed here with the shading. There's just subtle shading in the stub nib. I like that. That's the only one that I'm seeing it do that. Let's see. There might be a little bit of sheen in this, but if it is, it's a gold sheen and it just kind of blends in with that orange. But I just love this ink. I love this instead of the Momiji performed well too, but that pinky red, I'm just not going to be using that for everyday writing. I prefer this reddish orange instead. And let's see, I've also got, let me show my Leuchtturm, the little writing samples I've been. And you can see in the ink smear, it is pretty much an orange ink. It may have a little more red than just straight orange, but it's so saturated that it comes across to me more red in the writing, and I just like this as a red substitute. I'm seeing maybe a little bit of sheen, but because it's a gold sheen, it blends in with the orange, so I just love that color. All right, so if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.